Rebecca Thornton started digging the hole 3 days after the lawyer told her she'd probably lose everything. "Mrs. Thornton," Samuel Morrison had said, arranging papers on his desk with the careful movements of a man delivering bad news. "Montana territorial law is unclear on widows' property rights when the deceased's family contests the inheritance. Your husband left no will. His brother is claiming that as next male relative he should inherit the homestead claim. And frankly, the territorial court tends to favor male claimants over female ones, especially when the woman in question is childless and living alone. The claim is in both our names. We filed jointly under the Homestead Act." "Yes, but joint filing typically assumes the man is the primary claimant and the woman is auxiliary. Your husband's death changes the legal interpretation. His brother, William Thornton, is arguing that the claim should pass to male family, not to a widow who, his words, cannot properly maintain or defend the property. I've maintained it perfectly well for the 8 months since Daniel died." "That's not the issue, Mrs. Thornton. The issue is whether the court believes you can continue to maintain it, and whether you're actually maintaining it, or whether you've effectively abandoned it by not living on it full time." Rebecca had felt cold spread through her chest. "I live on it every day. I haven't left the property except to come to town for supplies." Morrison had looked uncomfortable. "William Thornton is claiming you don't. He's claiming the cabin appears unoccupied. No smoke from the chimney during cold nights. No tracks around the property. No signs of active habitation. He's building a case that you've abandoned the claim, which would allow him to file for it himself." That conversation had been in April 1871. By April 5th, Rebecca was digging a hole in the hillside behind her cabin. By May, she'd excavated a room 10 feet deep into the earth. By June, she'd moved underground entirely and let her surface cabin appear abandoned, because William Thornton was right about one thing. She couldn't defend the property against him legally. Couldn't win in territorial court, where judges assumed women were temporary caretakers until real men took over. Couldn't prove she was capable when the definition of capable meant male, but she could disappear, could become invisible, could maintain her claim so secretly that William couldn't prove she'd abandoned it, while also couldn't prove she was there. Could survive underground until 5 years of continuous occupation gave her uncontestable legal title under the Homestead Act. The first person to see what Rebecca was building was Martha Chen, whose husband owned the trading post in Helena, where Rebecca bought supplies. "Rebecca, honey, what in God's name are you doing?" Martha had ridden out to the property in late May, concerned because Rebecca's supply purchases had become strange. No lamp oil, no candles, minimal food, lots of tools. "Building something." "Building what? You're digging into a hillside. That's not building, that's making a grave." "It's a room, underground." Martha had dismounted, walked to the excavation site, looked down into the 10-foot-deep chamber Rebecca had carved from earth and stone. "Why? Why would you build underground when you have a perfectly good cabin right there?" Rebecca had been ready with the lie. "Because I can't afford to heat the cabin through Montana winter. Can't afford the wood. Underground stays warmer with no heating, constant earth temperature." "You're going to live in a hole?" "I'm going to live underground. There's a difference." Martha's expression had shifted from concern to something closer to fear. "Rebecca, this isn't healthy. You've been alone since Daniel died. Grief does strange things to people, makes them do things that aren't rational. Please come stay with us in Helena. You can work at the trading post. You don't have to bury yourself alive out here." "I'm not burying myself. I'm building shelter." But Martha left looking troubled, and within 2 weeks, everyone in Helena knew. Rebecca Thornton, the widow who'd lost her husband to a horse accident 8 months ago, was digging a hole to live in. was building a tomb, was losing her mind with grief and isolation, and refusing help from people who cared about her. The mockery was immediate and creative and cruel. Heard the Thornton widow is digging her own grave. Guess she wants to join her husband. Woman's gone mad. Living in a hole like some kind of animal. Someone should commit her. For her own safety, can't let a woman destroy herself like that. William Thornton heard the stories and smiled. Perfect. His sister-in-law was publicly displaying insanity, building underground like a deranged creature, proving she was unfit to maintain property. When he filed his claim challenge in territorial court, the judge would hear about the crazy widow living in a hole and rule in William's favor immediately. What William didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Rebecca's underground home was sophisticated engineering born from desperate necessity. Not a hole, not a grave, not the mad excavation of a grief-broken widow. An engineered structure designed for one specific purpose: permanent, invisible habitation. She'd started by choosing the location with precision that would have impressed any mining engineer. A south-facing hillside with natural drainage, solid earth that wouldn't collapse, granite substructure that would hold excavation stable. The southern exposure meant winter sun would warm the hillside, preventing ground freeze that could crack her structure. The natural slope meant water would drain away, not into her underground space. She'd excavated carefully over 6 weeks, removing earth bucket by bucket, carrying it to various locations across her property so no telltale pile of fresh dirt would mark her construction site. Every bucketful hidden, every trace of excavation concealed. 12 feet wide, 16 feet long, 10 feet deep into the hillside's heart. 600 cubic feet of earth moved by hand, by one woman, by lamp and moonlight when no one could observe. The front wall she'd built from stone, gathered from creek beds, carefully fitted so it looked like natural rock face from outside. Not mortared. Mortar would look artificial. Dry stacked with such precision that each stone held its neighbor through weight and friction and geometry. A door built into this wall but camouflaged. From 5 feet away you saw only hillside stone. Only if you knew exactly where to look and what pattern to trace could you find the entrance. Ventilation was the hardest engineering challenge. Humans need fresh air, fires need oxygen, but ventilation shafts would show from the surface, would mark her location, would make her visible. So Rebecca created shafts that ran through the hillside rock at angles, emerging in cracks that appeared natural, that released air so gradually no steam showed, no smoke concentrated, nothing visible except what might be natural rock breathing. The interior she'd carved with care that bordered on obsession. Shelves cut directly into earth walls, reinforced with boards to prevent collapse. A bed platform raised above the floor to avoid any ground moisture. A table, 2 chairs, books arranged on earth-carved shelves, a small cast-iron stove, not for heat particularly, the earth held 50-degree constant temperature year-round, but for cooking and occasional warmth during deep winter. Most ingeniously, she'd created a hidden skylight, not a window, a series of small openings that went up through rock at angles, bouncing natural light down through stone gaps into her underground room. From the surface, these openings looked like natural rock cracks. From inside, they provided enough diffused daylight to read by during full sun. At night, she used a lamp, but only minimal light, only what wouldn't show through the concealed ventilation. The root cellar extended deeper still, 8 feet down, where temperature held even colder, perfect for food storage. Potatoes, carrots, preserved meat, enough to survive weeks without surfacing if necessary. And the tunnel, the crucial element. Rebecca had excavated a tunnel connecting her underground home to the basement of her surface cabin. 30 feet of passage through earth, timber reinforced, allowing her to enter and exit through the cabin without ever leaving tracks near her actual residence. She could exit the cabin, Leave visible tracks if needed, but those tracks led to the cabin everyone thought was abandoned, not to her real home hidden in the hillside. The engineering had taken 3 months of 12-hour days. The cost had been a summer of isolation more complete than any winter would bring. Because summer construction meant staying invisible during the easiest season for observation, meant hiding from neighbors who might visit, meant complete solitude while every other homesteader in Montana was socializing, helping each other with harvests, building community. But Rebecca had built in solitude because community meant discovery. Discovery meant vulnerability, and vulnerability to William meant losing everything. Most importantly, from the surface there was no sign anyone lived there, no chimney smoke. The stove vented through rock cracks that dispersed smoke invisibly. No windows. Light came from a hidden skylight disguised as natural rock gaps. No door visible unless you knew exactly where to look and what to look for. No tracks leading to it. Rebecca entered and exited through her decoy surface cabin, then through a concealed tunnel that connected to the underground home. Her surface cabin she left intact, but deliberately appeared abandoned. No fires, no lights, no signs of occupation. Let William and his lawyers watch it and document that Rebecca Thornton had clearly left her property. Let the territorial court prepare to rule in William's favor. Meanwhile, Rebecca lived 10 feet underground, completely invisible, maintaining her claim secretly while appearing to have abandoned it. The isolation was brutal. She'd known it would be hard, but hadn't anticipated how hard. Living underground meant no visitors, no conversation, no human contact except monthly supply trips to Helena, where she had to pretend she lived in town, not on her property. She read by hidden skylight during day, by carefully controlled lamp at night, maintained a journal documenting her daily presence on the property, evidence she'd need eventually to prove continuous occupation. Worked her land only at night when no one could see, planted crops in ways that looked random, like volunteer plants, not deliberate cultivation. Months passed, summer into fall, fall into winter, and Rebecca stayed underground, invisible, maintaining a claim everyone thought she'd abandoned. The mockery continued through summer and fall, as people assumed Rebecca had indeed left Montana, probably returned east to family, proven unable to survive frontier life alone as a widow. Knew she couldn't make it. Women aren't built for homesteading alone. That underground tomb she was building? Never finished it, just gave up and left like they all do eventually. Smart woman would have married again instead of trying to prove something impossible. Woo! William Thornton filed his legal challenge in September 1871, claiming Rebecca had abandoned the property, citing lack of visible occupation, statements from neighbors who'd seen no signs of habitation, and Rebecca's own strange behavior before disappearing. The territorial court scheduled a hearing for December. By then, Montana winter would make travel difficult and property inspection impossible. The judge would likely rule based on testimony and documentation. William had statements from 3 neighbors saying they'd observed the property multiple times and seen no evidence of occupation. Had records showing Rebecca hadn't purchased heating supplies for the cabin. Had witnesses saying she'd been acting irrationally before disappearing. Rebecca's lawyer, Samuel Morrison, came to Helena looking for her in November, found her at the trading post buying minimal winter supplies. Mrs. Thornton, I've been searching for you. The hearing is in December. William's case is strong. Unless you can prove continuous occupation, the court will rule against you. I can prove it. How? Neighbors say the property appears abandoned. No smoke, no lights, no signs of life. That's because I've been living underground, secretly, maintaining the claim where no one can see. Morrison had stared at her like she'd spoken in foreign language. Underground? You mean you actually built that hole people were talking about? It's not a hole. It's a home, completely concealed, I've been there every single day since Daniel died, maintaining, cultivating, occupying continuously. I have journals documenting daily presence. I can prove I never abandoned the claim. You've been living in a hole for 7 months? In an underground home, and yes. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then, Mrs. Thornton, I don't know if the court will accept that as valid occupation. Living in a concealed underground structure sounds more like hiding than homesteading, and the eccentricity of it may undermine your credibility. The Homestead Act requires continuous occupation and improvement. Doesn't specify that occupation must be visible. I've occupied continuously. I've improved with cultivation and infrastructure. The fact that I did it invisibly doesn't violate the legal requirements. No, but it raises questions about your mental state, about whether a woman living alone in a hole is competent to maintain property. Rebecca had expected this. So, if I'd lived visibly and William had harassed me off the property, I'd lose for abandoning. If I live invisibly to avoid harassment and maintain occupation, I lose for being eccentric. There's no winning scenario for a widow, is there? Morrison hadn't answered, because they both knew the answer. The hearing was scheduled for December 15th. Rebecca prepared her documentation, her journals showing daily entries for 8 months, her cultivation records showing crops planted and harvested, her receipts for tools and supplies proving ongoing property investment. Then December brought complications Rebecca hadn't anticipated. The winter started early and severe. Snow by mid-November, more snow, temperature dropping below zero and staying there. By December 1st, Montana Territory was buried under 3 feet of snow, with more falling daily. The snow created a problem Rebecca hadn't considered. Tracks. Her underground home was invisible in summer, when grass and brush concealed everything, but in snow, any movement left visible evidence. Tracks from her underground entrance to anywhere would prove occupation, but would also expose her location to William, who was watching the property, looking for proof she wasn't there so he could finalize his claim. Rebecca became a prisoner in her underground home. Couldn't exit without leaving tracks that would expose her, couldn't be found before the hearing, or William would claim she'd only returned recently, not been there continuously. Had to stay invisible for 2 more weeks, until the hearing where she could reveal everything legally. 2 weeks underground with no exits, no fresh air beyond what came through the ventilation shafts that now felt inadequate, insufficient, strangling. No movement beyond the 12 by 16 space she'd excavated that now felt like it was shrinking daily. No interaction with anything outside except what she could see through her hidden skylight, which showed only snow. Endless white snow. The world erased into blank monotony. The psychological weight was crushing in ways Rebecca hadn't anticipated, despite months of preparation. She'd managed isolation when she could at least move on her property at night, could step outside her underground home in darkness, could feel wind on her face and see stars, and remember that a world existed beyond earth walls. But complete confinement in underground darkness was categorically different. A different species of isolation that she hadn't trained for, hadn't built tolerance to, hadn't understood, would break something in her mind. The earth pressed in from all sides. Not physically. The walls were stable, the engineering sound, but psychologically, mentally. The weight of thousands of tons of earth surrounding her on 5 sides, pressing down from above, pressing in from all directions. She could feel it even when sleeping, could sense it like a living presence that wanted to crush her into nothing. The ceiling felt lower each day. She'd excavated it to 10 feet height, plenty of space, more than sufficient. But by day 3 of confinement, it felt like 9 feet. By day 5, 8 feet. By day 8, she had to resist the urge to duck when standing. The rational part of her mind knew the ceiling height hadn't changed. The irrational part that was taking over insisted the earth was slowly closing in, slowly reclaiming the space she'd stolen from it. The walls seemed to move closer at night. She'd wake gasping, certain the room had shrunk to 6 feet wide instead of 12, certain she was being buried alive in increments, certain she'd wake one morning unable to move because the earth had pressed the walls together with her trapped between them. Silence became oppressive in ways silence above ground never was. No wind sounds penetrated this deep. She was below the frost line, below weather, in earth that absorbed all external sound, no animal sounds, no bird calls, no distant creek water, nothing but her own breathing and heartbeat, and the occasional creak of timber supports that sounded like the earth groaning as it prepared to collapse on her. She talked to herself to break the silence, narrated her actions like she was describing them to someone. Now I'm eating breakfast, hardtack and dried meat. Now I'm reading chapter 7 again because I've read everything else 3 times. Now I'm writing in my journal, day 11, 5 more days. I can last 5 more days. But her voice sounded wrong underground, absorbed by earth instead of echoing, dead, flat. Like even sound couldn't survive this deep, this isolated, this separated from the world above. She counted things obsessively, counted the stones in the front wall, 147 stones fitted together in dry stack precision, counted the books on her shelves, 19 books, read them all, read them again, counted words on random pages. Page 53 of her Bible had 368 words. She counted twice to be sure, counted her heartbeats, timed them, 68 beats per minute at rest, wondered if isolation was making her heart faster or if it had always been 68. Couldn't remember, counted breaths, 14 breaths per minute, counted how many breaths in an hour, 840, counted how many breaths in 5 days. Calculation helped pass time, but the numbers got so large they stopped meaning anything. Sleep became erratic. Underground there was no sun cycle to regulate her body. The hidden skylight showed day and night, but dimly, diffused through rock. She'd sleep for 2 hours, wake convinced she'd been unconscious for 8, would force herself to stay awake, lose track of time, discover from her skylight that 12 hours had passed. Time became non-linear, stretched and compressed randomly. Days felt like weeks, hours felt like minutes. No way to maintain normal schedule when your body didn't know if it was dawn or dusk. She dreamed about suffocation, about the earth collapsing, about being buried alive, and no one knowing, no one searching, her body rotting in darkness while the world above went on without her. Woke sweating despite the constant 50-degree temperature. Woke gasping for air that was actually fine, actually sufficient, actually moving through ventilation she'd engineered properly. But panic doesn't care about engineering. Panic says, you're underground, you're buried, you're going to die here, and no one will ever know. On December 10th, she heard sounds above, voices, footsteps crunching in snow directly over her underground home. William's voice, "See, no tracks anywhere, properties completely abandoned, no one's been here in months. Look at the cabin, doors frozen shut, windows are iced over, this claim is forfeit." Another voice, the territorial surveyor checking property status before the hearing. "Appears abandoned, yes, but we need to confirm no recent occupation. Check inside the cabin." Sounds of them forcing the frozen cabin door open, walking through the abandoned surface structure, finding exactly what Rebecca wanted them to find. Nothing. No signs of recent use. Frozen. Empty. Abandoned. "Satisfied?" William asked. "Woman left months ago, probably went back east where women belong. This land should go to family who can actually use it, to men who can work it properly." They left. Rebecca stayed absolutely silent in her underground room, 10 feet below where they'd been standing, listening to them document abandonment while she hid in invisible shelter. They'd walked directly over, without knowing it existed. 5 more days. She could last 5 more days. On December 14th, the day before the hearing, the snow finally stopped. temperature rose slightly. Rebecca could have exited, made the trip to Helena for the hearing. But exiting meant tracks. Tracks meant evidence William could use to claim she'd only just returned. She needed to arrive at the hearing with her documentation showing continuous occupation. But if William saw fresh tracks from her property the day before, he'd argue she'd just come back to fake evidence. So Rebecca stayed underground until dawn of December 15th. Then, in pre-dawn darkness, she exited through her concealed entrance, brushed snow behind her to hide evidence, made her way through 4 miles of deep snow to Helena for the 8 a.m. hearing. She arrived exhausted, snow-covered, carrying her journals and documentation. Morrison met her at the courthouse looking shocked. "My God, Mrs. Thornton, you look like you've been through hell." "I've been underground for 2 weeks without exit. It's the only way to maintain invisibility while snow shows tracks." "You stayed underground for 2 weeks straight, by choice?" "By necessity." The hearing was brief and strange. William Thornton presented his case: abandoned property, crazy widow, clear evidence of no occupation. His lawyer showed testimony from neighbors, the surveyor's report from December 10th documenting abandonment, receipts proving Rebecca hadn't bought heating supplies. Then Rebecca presented her journals. 8 months of daily entries documenting continuous occupation, records of cultivation, receipts for underground construction supplies, and the statement, "I have occupied my claim every single day since my husband's death." The fact that I chose to occupy it in a concealed underground structure rather than the visible surface cabin doesn't violate any homestead requirement. The act requires continuous occupation and improvement. I have provided both. That my occupation was invisible is irrelevant to its validity. The judge, a man named Harrington, who'd been appointed 2 months ago and was still learning territorial law, looked confused. "You're claiming you lived underground for 8 months?" "Yes, Your Honor. In a properly constructed, earth-sheltered dwelling I built for security and concealment reasons." "Why would anyone choose to live underground?" Rebecca looked directly at William. "Because my husband's brother threatened to force me off my property if I remained visible. Because Montana territorial law provides insufficient protection for widows against male relatives contesting inheritance. Because invisibility was my only defense against illegal harassment and claim jumping." "That's insane," William interrupted. "She's admitting she's crazy, admitting she built a hole to hide in. That's not homesteading, that's mental illness." Judge Harrington reviewed the journals, looked at Rebecca's documentation, looked at the surveyor's report showing abandoned property, looked at Rebecca herself, exhausted, slightly wild-eyed from 2 weeks underground, but clearly coherent and organized. "Mrs. Thornton, I'm going to ask you directly. Why underground? Why not simply live in your cabin and defend your property visibly?" "Because visible defense would have led to confrontation with a violent man. My husband told me before he died that his brother was dangerous, that if anything happened to him, I should protect myself however necessary. Underground occupation let me maintain my legal claim while avoiding physical danger." The courtroom was silent. Then Judge Harrington made a decision that surprised everyone. The Homestead Act requires continuous occupation for 5 years to establish uncontestable title. Mrs. Thornton has documented 8 months of continuous occupation through daily journals and cultivation records. The fact that this occupation occurred in an underground structure rather than the surface cabin is unconventional but not illegal. The Act doesn't specify where on the claim one must live, only that occupation and improvement must be continuous. Mrs. Thornton has met this requirement. Mr. William Thornton's challenge is denied. Mrs. Rebecca Thornton retains full legal rights to the homestead claim. William exploded. "She's insane. She lived in a hole. You're giving land to a crazy woman who buries herself alive." "She lived in a structure she built with her own labor on her own property." "That's homesteading, Mr. Thornton." And frankly, given your threatening behavior that drove her underground, I'm inclined to believe her security concerns were valid. Case closed. Rebecca had won. Legally, officially, but the cost became clear in the days after. She returned to her property and emerged from underground into her surface cabin. The relief of living above ground again was profound. Windows, natural light, space to move, the earth no longer pressing in from all sides. But the isolation had damaged something. She'd spent 8 months with almost no human contact, 2 weeks with literally zero external interaction, and the absence had created a void that didn't fill quickly. Conversation felt strange. Other people felt overwhelming. The trading post in Helena, which she'd once found comfortable, now felt too crowded, too loud, too much. Martha Chen visited in January, found Rebecca living in the surface cabin again, but different, quieter, more withdrawn. "Rebecca, you won your case. You can live normally now, come to town, be social. You don't have to hide anymore." "I know, but it's hard. The underground time, it changed things. Made me used to complete isolation, made human interaction feel difficult." "So you're going to stay out here alone? For what? You proved you could survive by yourself. You don't have to keep proving it." Rebecca was quiet. Then, "I'm not proving anything anymore. I'm just different now. The person who went underground 8 months ago isn't who came out, and I don't know how to be social again. Don't know if I want to be." By spring of 1872, Rebecca had sealed the underground home, filled the entrance, planted over it, returned it to Hillside. But she stayed on her property, working her land, living in her surface cabin alone. The isolation had become comfortable, normal, expected. She never married again, lived on the claim until 1903 when she died at age 68, left the property to the territory's first Women's Land Trust, specifying it should help widows defend property rights against male relatives. Her obituary mentioned she'd successfully defended a homestead claim in 1871 and lived independently for 31 years afterward. It didn't mention the underground home, or the 8 months of invisible occupation, or the 2 weeks of complete confinement. But in Montana Territory, among women who knew the story or whose mothers had told them, Rebecca Thornton became legendary. Not for building something technically clever, but for understanding that sometimes survival requires invisibility. That sometimes the only way to defend what's yours is to disappear so completely that no one can prove you've abandoned it, while also can't prove you're there. The mockery had been universal. The crazy widow building a grave, the deranged woman digging a hole, the insane creature burying herself alive. But Rebecca had understood something her mockers didn't. Power often targets visibility. Harassment requires a visible target. Legal theft requires proof of abandonment. If you can be simultaneously present and invisible, you can defend what's yours against forces that would take it. The underground home hadn't saved her from rain and snow. It had saved her from being seen, from being found, from being vulnerable to a violent man who would have driven her off land that was legally hers. The weather was just the tool that made invisibility necessary. Snow showing tracks, rain revealing smoke, natural conditions that expose occupation. Sometimes the thing that saves you isn't strength or cleverness, or even endurance. Sometimes it's the willingness to disappear completely, to sacrifice connection and comfort and normalcy, to become invisible until the law catches up with justice. And sometimes the cost of survival is becoming so accustomed to isolation that you can never quite return to the world you saved yourself from.